pictures success. And people get very motivated around goals if they're achievable, if they have what they need, if they are encouraged, if they're monitored, as well as what is the expectation. No one would go to work at a bank or a credit union that said, we usually pay people generously and most months we pay twice a month. If it was vague like that, people say, what? No, no, no. I need to know how much, how often. I don't want any confusion about that. Well, sometimes I turn that around on a person I'm working with, and I'll say, wait a minute. Of course you'd want to be clear about what you're going to get. I am not clear about what you're going to give. You need to get clear about, here is your job description. I've asked you for a written plan for how you intend to succeed at what's expected of you, and you keep putting it off. Would you want me to put off paying you until you got that taken care of? No. Well, remember, you entered into an agreement. What's the agreement? Work at establishing buy-in. Buy-in is where people say, yes, I can, yes, I want to. When there's resistance, and sometimes people have a very valid case about their resistance. Promises have been broken. Supervisors don't supervise. Managers don't manage. So people, they get very resistant in the workplace. So we've got to bust through that. Accountability for all involved. And this gap analysis, where do you want to be? Where are you now? Here's how I see you. This is how you see you. There's a clear picture here. Behaviors that don't work or people who are underperforming create sticky situations. And the remedy for that is for that to be addressed. And you can make a gratitude list. When you watch people in the company that you think are underperforming or that don't behave in ways that you think that is acceptable, the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, do they report to me? If the answer is no, put that on your gratitude list. Oh, thank goodness, Wilbur does not report to me. Get your focus off of people that distract you because you choose to stare at them. You don't pay attention if it's not anything you can do anything about. If no one has asked you in a survey or an appraisal, give us feedback, then you've got to turn your direction where you can do the most good. And that's generally on how are you performing? How are you getting along with other people? What behaviors do you exemplify? And of course, a plan. A performance plan is what keeps people on track and focused and on purpose. And then evaluation. How will progress and when will progress be evaluated? There are do's and don'ts that are proven on this. Do become confident you can help, and you can. First and foremost, yourself. I call it a compassion deposit. When you do something and it didn't turn out like you wanted it to, or you make a mistake or you forget something, that's a compassion deposit. You'll be able to draw on that when somebody else makes that mistake. It's very tough to work with people who walk on water, who act like they've never made a mistake and don't practice forgiveness when people do. In our business, there are some mistakes or violations that the consequence could even lead to termination. That's how serious it can be. Almost every business has that. But we're seldom in that end of the spectrum. Focus on the present. Do not stay stuck on what happened 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago. Say to someone, look, let's start fresh right now. I want you to establish goals. I want you to, and here's a couple of them I'm going to give to you as the manager. This is what I want to see happen. And I want you to add some of your own goals. And then I want you to build an action plan on, and I'm glad to help you with that. But I want you to draft it about what you'll do first. When will you do what? So that you can say at the end of the year or end of the quarter, whatever these timelines are tied to these goals, this is what I did in terms of effort, and here's the result. Here's what happened. Feelings, emotionally, how we're responding to what's going on around us, inside of us, is about comparing what we want to what we have. We have feelings about it, and the Chinese say there's 165 feelings: hungover, disgusted, disturbed, annoyed, irritated. Here's some ways to really maximize your time. It's called the 4 disciplines, and I've talked about this a little bit, about compartmentalizing. And you can do that with that notebook, where you start things that are on your mind, things that come up and they're not urgent, but you need to get them done or get answers for. You can begin to say, can I put any of that together? Can I combine any of that? Is there anything I'm doing? This is good, write it down. Is there anything I'm doing to distract myself from what I need to get done? So you want to shrink your list every day on how you're going to spend your time so that it fits your time. Write this down. It's a demotivator to plan to do things you can't get done over and over again. And in my business, I have a lot of different ideas, projects, and obligations, and daily that could be moving just like I think yours can be too. Look for ways you can do 2 things together. For example, I highly recommend that you have a file called Afraid to Throw Away. Sometimes when I'm on hold or I sign into a webinar early, I'll get that Afraid to Throw Away file. That's where I put everything I couldn't figure out what to do with. And then I decide to shred it. More often than not, now I'm ready to let go of it. If I can't let go of it and I can't figure out where to file it, then I just date it again like I did when I first put it in, Afraid to Throw Away. I date it again. It means I looked at it again and I'm not willing to part with it. I'm not willing to shred it, and I don't have anywhere to file it. What we're all after is balance or equilibrium, where I'm spending my time where I get the best return. There's things outside of work that are every bit, if not more important to you than your job. But you want to keep things balanced with what can I get done, how well can I get it done, and stay in what I call the real world about that. And these 4 disciplines will become second nature for you, and you'll feel a big payoff from that. Number 6, is this good or what? Forgive and forget. If an elephant has a longer memory than angry and bitter people, I can't believe that they really do. Grant to others what you would want for yourself. People you work with are going to step on your toes. They're going to do things you don't like. Your company's going to make decisions that you find totally puzzling. Grant to other people what you would want for yourself. You make choices that you believe are in your best interest, and you find out later they really weren't, or someone else might question them. See how you'd feel about that. Bearing grudges ruins happiness. It's like battery acid on a piece of cloth. It'll just eat you up. Look for and learn. Learn from your mistakes. Get over things that happen. That on a weather scale, which is one of my favorite things to use with my coaching clients, I'll tell them, imagine a ruler, a 12-inch ruler, and at the left end of that ruler is light rain, and at the other end, the right side of the ruler, where it measures a foot, is a tsunami. And begin to ask yourself about your reactions to people or upsets that happen to you. Where is it on here? because we know that light rain compared to a tsunami, there's not any correlation. A thunderstorm compared to a tornado or a hurricane, and almost everything that happens to me is light rain. Occasionally it's a thunderstorm and it passes on. See what you can do to develop a learner or a student attitude and mentality versus a victim mentality. Some of your companies have had me come in and I've done a culture study where I've interviewed a lot of people who work there. And not always, but occasionally, someone will share something with me that is burdening them or that they're very upset over that happened last year, in some cases 30 years ago. And I'll ask them if it helps. Does it seem to help them to hang on to that wrong that was done to them? When we can't let go of things, we keep carrying them around. So when you can, what you want to do for yourself is confront the uncomfortable. Recognize your triggers. Occasionally, I've said this, you've said this, where you say, well, I can't handle such and such. I can't work with a person who's like XYZ. I can't wait on someone who acts like this. Well, actually you can. You certainly don't want to be subjected to abuse and don't have to be. But let go of a lot of that. It's what I call, spraying yourself with Teflon. And when you run into someone or a circumstance that's upsetting to you, ask yourself as soon as possible, how long, write this down, how long do I plan to be upset about it? And you can make a choice. Occasionally, I even set my timer on my phone, and I'll say, I'm going to be upset about that for 20 minutes. I hope no one disturbs me during my upset. And some things, are really, really, really
Now, I realize this all sounds like you're creating more work and spending more time, but if you commit to 30-minute blocks per day, and that's probably more than you're going to need, you're basically allocating 90 minutes of your work day on email. And if you do that for every work day, you've spent 7.5 hours that week on email, and that's almost half of the 13 hours we started with, right? So you're beating the average by 5.5 hours at this point. I would say that's a job well done. So really, in recap, I suggest in the morning after lunch, spend time delegating, deleting, deferring emails, and doing the under 2-minute do's, and then leave the evening block, which is perhaps a bit longer, mostly for the deferred do's. So far we've cut the time we spent on email down, but of course, in reality, not every email is going to be so clearly definable or accessible in a short period of time. So applying these 4Ds works a lot better when the emails we receive are clear. So while we can't control the quality of emails we receive, we certainly can be part of the solution. So my third piece of advice, and again, if you're following on the worksheet, that would be under number 3 on the first page, would be to simply set the example and send better emails. And there are 2 real simple, high-impact ways that I will share with you that will allow you to do just that. So first of all, stick to 1 message per email. You can't properly delegate, defer, or schedule messages into tasks or onto your calendar if the email contains multiple messages, right? Often very different messages. So if your message looks something like this, how would you handle creating a reminder to complete the survey results report by Friday, but also make sure you don't forget the second part about the promotion? Plus, what would the subject line be for something like this? It's either going to be unclear or at best will only hint to one part of the message, right? So my advice here is to just omit the second part and send a separate message instead. It will be much easier to deal with the follow-up if these were 2 different messages. And that brings me to my next advice, which is the subject line. And this is really the first clue you get when deciding how to handle an email is the subject line. So we just decided to stick to a single message per email. So now we need to find a clear subject line to accurately state what the message is going to be about. So make your subject line clear, relevant, and it doesn't necessarily have to be as short as possible, but certainly condense it. But make sure you tell a lot of information in there. And of course, always make sure that your emails have a subject line to begin with. So let's look at some examples. Obviously, this is an example of a poor subject line, right? The meeting time changed. What meeting? What time did it change to? It's very unclear. So this would be a lot better. It tells you what the meeting is about, first of all. It tells you what the new date and new time will be.
That when they're implemented can help make it happen. And here they are. You know, one is this idea about acknowledging your role. And in a webinar, I know that I could have people that are soon to be a supervisor, and I could have people in a webinar that have been a supervisor 25 plus years. But still, this idea of renewing and acknowledging your role, it's going to be a key component to excelling. Planning and prioritizing, isn't that a challenge? We know this. The better we get at planning, the less we have to do. And the challenge for me, and I'll bet you identify with this, is every day taking a look at what all I have to do, because I'm inclined to always take on positions, or my personality type always has more to do than I can get done. People who have more to do than they can get done are people who have to specialize in how to prioritize. You know, what do I do first? How to be accessible. And, you know, on that number 3 there on those habits, you might put in parentheses, be accessible, stay in the real world, into parentheses. Like right now, if you have good boundaries with your team, you're not available. So you can't be accessible 24/7, but you can be accessible in an impressive way, and there's more than one way to do that, and I'll show it to you. Teamwork. In financial institutions, that's the name of the game, isn't it? Because everything is connected. So if you did a paper chain for how the branch is connected to other parts of the company, there wouldn't be a part of the company that it wouldn't be connected to. If you take technology, the very same thing, isn't that true? So we have our circle of influence as a supervisor, and that circle is connected to all these other circles all over your company. People who work in the branch know that the further away geographically they are from headquarters, the harder it is to feel that connection. So whoever heads up branches or retail has that challenge of how can I keep everyone recognizing we're one big team made of circles of other teams that run departments or branches or areas of influence. Communication, number 5. I spoke to a CEO yesterday for about an hour discussing their strategic planning session, and he said that for the 19 years he'd been at this company, they continue to get a lot of complaining about we're not effective communicators. Well, to be effective as a communicator is certainly a challenge. So we're going to talk about how you do it up and how you do it down. Sometimes you need to do it laterally too. Delegating successfully. Why don't we delegate? Well, if I was sitting right there with you, you'd tell me this. You'd say, I don't delegate because there's not time. I don't delegate because I don't have enough confidence. I know how to do it, and I'm concerned if I give that to someone else, they won't know how to do it. sometimes the supervisor tells me they don't delegate because they feel obligated to do that task. And everything I just said is pretty legitimate. But here's what you want to consider, and that is you need more time to do some of the things these habits are going to call for. So I'll see if I can help you gain more confidence in how you might delegate. And then the dreaded one, isn't it? Number 7, that's supposed to be a lucky number. Number 7, discipline. How do we do that effectively? So that's what's in store for you, and we're going to kick off here with this first habit and see where we go.
A real eye-opening experience for me that how careful we have to be as role models or as parents, because the people who watch us will pick up and do what we do. So you have to be a model for them. Whatever you expect them to do with the customer, the member, the depositor, is how you have to do it, because that's what they're going to be looking at. You're who they're going to look at to determine how it's to be done at this institution. So how you treat the customer is important. What do you do? How do you greet them? We might tell our employees we want to make sure these things happen when we greet someone who walks into our business, but do we do that consistently also? And then perhaps even more important is what you say about that depositor after they leave. So what do we say that the employees that report to us hear? We all know that we have lunatic customers that we have to wait on. You know, there's people all over the world that maybe should be locked up, but a lot of them aren't. They come in and do business with us, and they're difficult. They're always difficult. It's their mode of operation to always be that way. They're that way everywhere they go. They don't just single out the financial institution. They're that way everywhere. But what do we say about them where our employees hear it? And then how do you treat them, the employee? How do you treat them? And what do you say about the employee behind their back that other employees might hear? So we're held to a higher standard as the supervisor, as the head teller. So we have to always remember that people are watching us and people are listening, whether you know it or not. So just like that parent who doesn't know their children are paying that much attention to them tends to repeat what we do. So sometimes, you know, we'll tell our children, now listen, don't smoke because it's a really bad habit and it's not good for you. And the whole time we're smoking when we tell them. Well, research says that normally that child will smoke also, because what spoke louder than your words were your actions. So you always have to remember that when you're in this role that you're in as a model, as a supervisor, as a head teller. You want to define the environment of how staff treat each other. So if we don't give any better service to the people who come in and deposit money with us and do business with us as we do to each other, then we have to begin inside the institution making sure that that's the highest quality service experiences that are going on every day between coworkers. Some of you will only supervise and manage perhaps the tellers, where others of you that might grow and be to include other people within the organization. But we do have to interact with people whether we manage all of those or not. Our people are interacting with them in the institution. So you have to define that. And where I would start, it's always at the top of my list, is to put a stop to any gossiping that's going on. So that particular activity that people tend to engage in, and we do it a lot. It's a pastime in America. I'm not sure if it's this way all over the world, but I'm very familiar with what goes on in businesses in America, and it is a pastime where we talk about each other. We make judgment calls about how people are dressed, how they act, how they live their lives, how they raise their children, just any topic. We tend to put ourselves up as a judge of that person. And so when we do that and we allow gossiping to run rampant within our organization, then we're tearing people down. So I have never seen gossip lead to something positive. It always leads to a negative outcome. So since we've said that your primary responsibility is to not only be a role model, but to develop your people to build a dynamic team, how are you going to build a dynamic team if the team has split into different factions and they're gossiping about one another? So we have to put a stop to it. Now, how do we do that? How do we stop people from talking about it? Well, first of all, you have to say to